Welcome to the Kickin It Forward podcast, the podcast that brings you amazing stories of hope, power, and perseverance so that you can overcome obstacles in your life. Listen closely while we take you through stories of amazing people that have overcome the mighty mountain of cancer as well as other obstacles to become legacy makers and peak performers in their fields. It's our hope that this podcast will leave you inspired and motivated to move the mountains in your life so that you can become your best self. This show is brought to you by the Kay Yow Cancer Fund, and in the words of our founder, the great Kay Yow, when life kicks you, let it kick you forward. Please enjoy the show. What's going on, podcast family? I'm excited to be presenting this interview with you with the one and only Christy Thomaskutty. Now, she's famous. She won't tell you that she's famous, but let me tell you, she's famous. She is an ESPN commentator and analyst for women's basketball. She was a standout basketball player at Tulane University, where she still holds records for three-pointers made in a season. She was also the coach at Emory University for 14 seasons, and she was the first non-Division I coach to serve as the president for the WBCA since 1999. Christy, how are you doing this morning, my friend?
I'm doing fabulous. Beautiful day here in North Carolina.
For sure. Yeah. And so before we get into the meat of the conversation, I believe that backstories are important. And you were a hooper, used to play, and, you know, basketball is a big part of course, the Kay Yow Cancer Fund, founded by Coach Kay Yow, who's Hall of Fame basketball coach. So we have to tell basketball stories. We have to feel obligated to. So growing up, you played a lot of basketball. When did you find out, Christy, that you were like a standout, like you were better than most of the people around you?
About 3 minutes ago, when Odell, you used the term standout. That's when I found out. I grew up playing because my older brother played. I played, and this shows my age, I had to play with boys growing up. So basketball was just that venue that I got to hang out with my friends and play something that I loved. And, you know, I'm very blessed that it afforded me the opportunity to get an education at Tulane, and this helped me travel the world and meet so many wonderful people. And in some ways, probably helped save my life.
I love that. And we're going to talk about that. And your family was very, very big on education. And so you said you just kind of played, you know, growing up with your brother. When did you find out, like, oh, snap, like this could like pay for my education? When was that moment?
Well, and again, this wasn't the era of, you know, Twitter and all of these, like, just where everything's publicized back when I played. And so it really wasn't until I was in high school and my dad came home because my high school coach had told him that he had been getting some calls that I ever thought it was something possible. Because, again, both my parents coming from India, it was first and foremost academics. Basketball did not matter if I wasn't getting straight A's. And so, you know, the opportunity to get an athletic scholarship was icing on the cake because the path had always been paved, work to get an academic scholarship. And that's why Tulane fit me so well, because it was the best of both worlds.
I love that. So you transition from a player on the court to a coach. Now, was that something that you had intentions on doing, or was it something that just kind of happened?
I always kind of thought I did because I loved my high school coach. To this day, still think he's one of the most influential individuals in my life. But my mom and dad, both being educators, high school educators, said, no way, you're not going to teach. And so I was actually a consultant my first year out of college, thinking I was going to take a gap year to go to law school, and was miserable. Pay was great, but miserable. Knew I missed the game. And then I had the opportunity that next year to become a full-time assistant at St. Louis University. And from there, I was hooked.
That's amazing. And one thing about it's like being away from the game. I didn't play at the level that you did, but I did play, and being away from it, you miss it a little bit. But knowing that you have a heart for it, I think kind of pushes you into coaching, and you coached for a pretty long time. And this is where I kind of want to start diving into, you know, overcoming cancer, which was an obstacle for you. But before we dive into that, what was an obstacle when you got into coaching? Like, where was it where you're like, man, we have to get through this and we have to get through that?
I mean, there's so many. I think if you talk to any head coach, I mean, just a year ago, the pandemic for everyone that they're still going through. I mean, every day is a new challenge for a coach, for an athlete. And so, I mean, I think for me, if I go back, I remember one of the greatest just global challenges was 9/11. Was coaching at Illinois State then, and trying to explain to young adults that for the first time where they're seeing it, life's not fair. And everything that they've grown up believing had just been ripped out from under them in a matter of a couple of hours on that September morning. And that's where, again, you start realizing just what the game of basketball can do to help young people, but also me. It's not like, I mean, I was grieving. I was shaken to the core because in my lifetime, I had lived in bliss in this wonderful country. And so while that was a big one, I can't help but say this again. Every day when you're dealing with hoops, there's an obstacle for any coach, for any player. The magnitude just varies day to day.
That's absolutely true. And if I research this correctly, and you can tell me if I'm missing a little bit, you were supposed to serve as the president for the WBCA, and then you were diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Is that right? Was the timeline right?
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about the highs and lows of a 24-hour period, that was it. I got the call from Danielle Donahue saying, we want you to serve as vice president. That put me on the presidential track for 2 years later. And especially coming from Division III. And you got to know my background, where my second head coach I ever served under was Joe Hutchison, who was 4-time WBCA president, just legendary Hall of Fame coach. And that's where the influence of servitude in the game came from. And so to get that honor to do something that she did, I mean, my mind was blown to think that, hey, I can make an impact. I can help our game. And then the next day, I get the call from my doctor saying, I've got some bad news. You've got cancer. And so I think probably for what anyone feels in that moment, your mind goes to all the dark places, all the horror stories that you've heard. And that's the highs and lows of once again, truly a 24-hour period, to where at that moment, basketball kind of took a back seat because it was a matter of, all right, and this is what the coaching does for you. This is what a background athlete goes, what's the game plan? What are we going to do? And I will say this, to this day, I'll always be blessed that my little brother, he's the chief of staff of a hospital system in Baltimore, Maryland. And I had talked to him like 2 weeks earlier saying, yeah, I'm going to have a biopsy. And I said, it's probably nothing, but, and I never said another thing to it, because even when I got the diagnosis from my doctor, my wife was with me, but I said, I'm not going to tell my family or anyone until I have the information, because I know how my mind went. I didn't want to do that to all my loved ones. And my little brother calls me the next morning. So for probably more like 18 hours, I kind of went through that panic mode of, oh no. And he called me and said, hey, I just want to follow up on that biopsy you had 2 weeks ago. And so I lost it, emotion, and I'm crying, and I tell him. And so within 2 hours, he has all the information on thyroid cancer sent to me via email. And from that point on, I was at peace, because I truly believe knowledge is power. And I believed in my doctors, and I believed in what we were going to do. But I was lucky too. I always had my backup quarterback, my little brother, of if I had a question, I could bounce it off him. And so, again, I'm a walking billboard for being blessed in so many different ways due to cancer.
That's amazing. And for those, Christy, that might be listening, that maybe they're starting to go through the process. Maybe they just found out. Is there something, you had great support from your brother, and I feel like sports in a lot of ways kept you level-headed, because like you said, all right, what's the game plan? But for somebody listening, maybe they don't have the background that you had in competitive sports. What's one piece of advice you could give them to kind of help level their head a little bit?
Well, I'll do the same thing my little brother told me. You have to self-advocate. And so it is, ask the questions. Don't be afraid. Get the knowledge. Get the information. Don't be afraid of a second opinion. Don't be afraid of the information you're given, but you have to believe. And I think the one thing I've learned going through this and having friends and family members go through cancer is from an emotional perspective, everyone's journey is so different. And so embrace that, take care of yourself. And I think for family members, I watched that firsthand, watching my family and the look on their faces and nothing I could do to help them. That's a separate journey for them. And so everyone has to embrace their journey. But I'm a true believer knowledge is power. So you got to ask those questions and get the information until you feel comfortable with the path that you need to follow.
That's so true. That's so true. And having that diagnosis, and again, a lot of this, Coach Yow's famous saying, when life kicks you, let it kick you forward. Having a diagnosis and realizing how serious it was, it caused you to take a real backseat to basketball and have to let go of coaching. How difficult was that?
It was hard. I had surgery in June. My treatment wasn't until September. And naive me, I had surgery on a Thursday. I thought I was going to go run my basketball camp the next Monday, because that's just, I think when you're a coach, it's just next thing on your list. And obviously I couldn't do that. But I went recruiting 3 weeks later. Might not have been the smartest thing in the world. But again, it's just as a coach, there's a calendar and you always stick to it and you do it. And so no part of me after surgery ever thought I wouldn't do it. And then as I started to get ready to do my treatment, I knew I didn't have energy. I knew that I was just not where I needed to be. And this is where I say, again, everyone's journey is different. I know for me, what I ask of my kids, I expect of myself. And I knew as we approached it, and I kept thinking every day it's going to get better. I kept waking up that next day thinking, all right, I'm going to be ready for the season. And it got to October and I knew I didn't have it. And Holly Rowe actually told me this. She said, your mental health is one of the most important pieces to your battle against cancer. And I think any coach recognizes during a season, our mental health definitely takes a backseat because you're worried about your kids. You're worried about the X and O's. You're worried about fans, alumni, boosters, your administration. And I just knew I didn't have what I needed to take care of all of those factors and my health. And so I made that hard decision to step away.
And after you stepped away, being able to make that hard decision. And again, if somebody is facing a transition that might be listening, maybe it's not cancer for you. Maybe you had to, go take care of a loved one. Maybe you had to change jobs against your will a little bit. Moving into a new role as a commentator and analyst for ESPN, how did that help you in your decision to step away from coaching, and how did that help your mental health?
Well, when I stepped away, I didn't know that I was going to have that great opportunity to step into ESPN. And I will say that it saved me because it allowed me, without the stress, to stay involved with the game I love. And so I will forever be grateful to Pat Lowry and ESPN for taking a chance on a coach. And it's the best thing for me. I mean, as a friend of mine I always said, I made the biggest pivot of my career when I left coaching and went into ESPN. And it was scary. But at the same time, it's life. Anything worth doing is worth taking that chance. And I'm still growing in this profession. Every day I'm learning something new because I'm just an old coach as far as my background goes. Now I'm trying to learn like angles of TV, pauses, going to break, things like that I still screw up on a daily basis. But I go back to being an athlete, being a coach, it's next play. And that's life. I think that's honestly, that's life for anyone, but it is, whether it's a pivot, whether it's you truly get knocked down, it's next play.
I love that. Next play. Maybe we'll call this episode Next Play. What do you think about that? Is that cool? Would you like that?
I'm all for it, Odell.
I love it. Now, this is just a fanboy question, Odell fanboy question. So hopefully this will help everybody listening. If not, keep listening for the next one. But when I went to school, I wanted to do what you're doing right now. And I've always been curious about when you're preparing for the game, because you have to know all of the players. Like if the 16th person off the bench comes in, you have to know a little bit about them. How deep is that prep?
I will, some of my former coaching colleagues know I prep the same way I did when I was coaching. Like I'm watching out of bounds plays, I'm watching rotations, I'm watching coming out of timeouts, what coaches call, but I'm preparing for two teams now, not just the opponent. And I'll be honest with you, and this is the Southern accent in me that always, it's the pronunciations that I spend the most time on, unfortunately, because of just how my brain is wired and what comes out of my mouth. But I'm also, I was that kid that, again, I was playing in the 90s. We didn't have a lot of TV. And so I know that this might be this one individual's best game of her career, or it might be the only time that this one team is going to be on national TV. And I want to do it justice, and I want to make sure I'm prepared. And it's like anything in life. If you're over-prepared, it's a cake. And so that's probably the greatest lessons I've learned, is that I don't have to share everything I've learned in my preparation. I just want to make it entertaining for everyone. And that's life. If you're being entertained, you're going to love what you're listening to or what you're watching. And that's my goal for anyone who watches one of our broadcasts. Maybe learn a little bit about the game and about these individuals, but be entertained by these great athletes on the floor.
That's amazing. And be over prepared. I think that's kind of related a little bit to what we're talking about, getting over your diagnosis and how your brother had that information and knowledge being power, and having all that data to go through and say, okay, that we can do this if this doesn't work, and we can do this and we can do this, and then translating it, from your years of coaching, this contingency play based on this and what they do. So I think that's an amazing story as we move forward. And as we're closing up this interview, it's been a great time. We got to end with some fun stuff, Christy. We have to end with some fun stuff. And so you're from Alabama, is that right?
I am born and raised in North Alabama. From
Alabama. Are you a Crimson Tide fan?
I am born and raised. My grandfather, he's not biological, but for every purpose, he was my grandfather, was the biggest Alabama football fan. And so I grew up every Saturday listening to Eli Gold on the radio, because, again, every game wasn't on TV at the time. And so now, blessed that every Saturday, everybody who knows me knows that when Alabama's on, that's what I'm watching. Roll
Tide. Have you met Nick Saban?
I did, actually. Very briefly. It was a handshake, but it was that fangirl moment. I've always said the one thing I would love to do in life is just be able to follow that man if I was blessed for an hour, because I would love to go as soon as he walks off a field on Saturday through an entire week of his preparation for the next game. But I would take 24 hours. I would take 20 minutes. I would take 2 minutes. Let's be real. I just think he's a wonderful educator, because the way he teaches life to his players. And I just think he's a great football coach as well. But I like to say this. I have always been an Alabama fan. So while it's been great these last 10 years with Nick Saban, I've also had the down years as well.
Yeah, well, we're not going to talk about those. And I have to end up with this one. Your favorite either interview or game that you commentated?
I mean, my favorite interviews got to be Gino Auriemma. One, you've got to be on your toes because you never know how he's going to respond. And I just think he's a great interview. My favorite game, honestly, was a buzz. And for women, this is unique, but it was a tip-in. Alabama upset Mississippi State 2 years ago at Mississippi State when Mississippi State was ranked. And Alabama did it on a tip-in. That was one of those times where, again, I didn't need to say a word because these young ladies let their actions speak for themselves. But there's just so many. I'm blessed that I get to cover these amazing young women who are playing at such a high level. And I think that's the hard part. The common fan doesn't understand truly what these coaches and players go through on a daily basis to be able to play this sport at such a high level.
That's amazing. And final question for anybody listening, if they're going through something, whether it be cancer, whether it be the diagnosis of a loved one, or whether it be maybe their cancer has been in remission, what is one word or phrase of advice you would like to leave them with?
I want to come back to that because I do want to say one thing, and I want to give a shout out to my team doctor at the time, Lawrence Galinsky, who I was one of those coaches who never went and got a physical. I would just, if I was sick, I'd go get the Z-Pack, I'd do whatever. And the year before I was diagnosed, he said to me, I'm going to give you this medication this time, but this is the last time unless you start coming in for a physical. And Odell, it was that next physical where he just thought my thyroid looked enlarged. Wow. And he said, let's do some tests. And I think people who know about thyroid cancer, it usually goes undiagnosed, metastasizes into another form. And so what I always say when it comes to cancer is just get your yearly physical. You never know what will come out of it. And again, that's probably the best way of being prepared to take care of yourself. But to answer your question, and I think it's life in general, it's resiliency. I think as young people, we were always told, work hard, you'll get what you want. Well, I think really quickly, you're not going to get anywhere without hard work, but you got to be resilient. You just got to stay the course until that door opens for you. And so I think whether it's a diagnosis, whether it's life, just be resilient.
I love that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all around the world, clap your hands, stomp your feet for the amazing Christy Thomaskutty. Christy, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your contribution to this great project that we're doing with the fund. And everybody, we will hear you on the next episode. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope that you'll take this story and use it for inspiration so that you can overcome those things in your life that were destined to break you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and rate this podcast. It'll help us spread the message far and wide to help even more people. For more information on the Kay Yow Cancer Fund and to see how we raise money for life-saving cancer research for all cancers affecting women, as well as help provide access to quality cancer health care for underserved women and unite people for a common cause, be sure to visit kayyow.com.